During the Second World War, the United States undertook an unprecedented logistical endeavor, establishing a vast network of over 400 prison camps across its heartland. Within these confines, 425,000 Axis soldiers, sailors, and airmen found themselves in a strange, new world, far from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. The official records from this period tell a story of near total control. Out of 2,222 documented escape attempts by German prisoners, an overwhelming 2,221 were swiftly recaptured. Yet it is the single, unresolved case that transcended mere statistics and blossomed into enduring legend. That case belonged to Heinrich Schaeffer, a Luftwaffe pilot, a veteran of the North African campaign, who one August morning in 1944 stepped out of a Texas prison camp and evaporated into the immense American landscape, leaving behind nothing but a perfectly made bed, a folded uniform, and a cryptic penciled note that would echo through the decades. Freedom is not given. It must be found. The initial reaction among the guards at Camp Herne, known with a mixture of irony and affection as the Fritz Ritz, was one of disbelief. The camp was a model of secure, orderly detention. German officers, men like Schaeffer and his close friend Karl Müller, lived a life of surprising routine within the wire. They tended vegetable gardens, staged theatrical productions, studied from textbooks provided by the Red Cross, and played chess under the watchful eyes of their captors. The American guards were not brutal jailers. They were often young men from the surrounding Texan counties, disciplined yet fair, and a strange, informal camaraderie had blossomed. This very normality made Schaeffer's disappearance all the more shocking. It seemed an impossibility, a breach not just of physical security, but of a perceived understanding. The camp commander ordered an immediate lockdown. Searchlights carved arcs across the parched earth. Bloodhounds were brought in from Houston, and jeeps fanned out along the dusty grid of rural roads. Telegrams flashed to every sheriff's office in central Texas, alerting them to an armed and dangerous German flyer on the loose. As the external manhunt began, an internal, quieter drama unfolded within the barracks. Karl Müller, Schaeffer's confidant, sat in contemplative silence, observing the frantic search. He knew his friend had not been driven by a simple desire to defy his captors. In whispered conversations under the vast Texas sky, Schaeffer had revealed a deeper, more philosophical yearning. "Do you know what freedom tastes like, Karl?" he had asked one still evening. "It is not bread. It is not air. It is silence, the kind of silence that belongs to no one." Karl now understood that Schaeffer's escape was not from the Americans, but from the confines of his own existence, from the psychological weight of captivity. He had not fled in a reckless, impulsive dash. He had executed a plan born of meticulous observation. He had studied the guards' rotations, learned the precise timings of their routines, and identified the subtle human vulnerabilities in the camp's design. The brief, unguarded moments, the unlocked doors during kitchen cleanup, the predictable patterns of men who had grown comfortable. The greatest irony was that the Americans' humanity and their reliance on orderly systems had, in fact, created the cracks through which a patient and determined man could slip. The world beyond the wire, however, was a formidable adversary in its own right. Texas itself was a prison of a different kind, a sprawling, merciless expanse of scorching sun, endless horizons, and rugged terrain. Previous escape attempts had almost all ended the same way. Exhausted, dehydrated men would stumble upon a remote farmhouse, and in a testament to the disarming decency they encountered, would be given a meal and a glass of water before the local sheriff was quietly summoned. The American strategy was not built on fear and brutality, but on an overwhelming systemic efficiency and a disconcerting kindness that proved to be an inescapable trap. Schaeffer, however, had learned from these failures. He treated each recaptured prisoner's story as a tactical debrief. analyzing their mistakes in distance, preparation, and interaction with the locals. He had not merely planned an escape. He had planned a disappearance, assembling a secret cache of dried food, a stolen compass, and crucially, knowledge of how to navigate the land and avoid the predictable patterns of a fleeing man. His opportunity came with a sudden, violent prairie storm. Under the cover of torrential rain and booming thunder, which masked sound and scattered the searchlights, Schaeffer made his move. He did not run. He moved with deliberate, timed precision, using the flashes of lightning to guide his steps through the shadows. He slipped through a drainage ditch, cutting his hands on the wire, and emerged on the other side of the perimeter a free man, yet one confronted by the immense challenge of the open plains. For days he traveled by night, hiding in abandoned structures by day, navigating by the distant, rhythmic glow of oil derricks. He reached the swollen, treacherous Brazos River, a churning barrier of muddy water, and through sheer force of will, fought his way across. He believed he had overcome the greatest obstacle. Meanwhile, the official machine of the U.S. Army was in motion. The search was not conducted in anger, but with a cool, procedural relentlessness. Roadblocks were established, Army Air Force pilots on routine flights were instructed to scan the ground, and a network of local sheriffs and ranchers was activated. It was these local cowboys, men like ranch foreman Earl Whitaker, who proved to be the most effective trackers. They could read the land like a map, a broken stalk of grass, a faint impression in the mud, the subtle signs of a man moving against the grain of nature. They followed Schaeffer's trail with an almost respectful determination. When they finally found him, he was not a fearsome enemy combatant, but an exhausted, limping figure, defeated by the very vastness he had sought to conquer. In a moment that encapsulated the entire strange conflict, Whitaker did not draw his weapon, but instead offered food and a quiet acknowledgement. "You made it farther than anyone, but you can't walk out of Texas." Schaeffer, broken and weeping, surrendered not to force, but to this final humane gesture. The official record was closed, escapee recaptured after 76 hours. But a haunting anomaly remained in the files, a detail that would fuel the legend for decades. When the man who surrendered was processed, his fingerprints did not match those of Heinrich Schaeffer. The individual wore Schaeffer's boots, carried his mess kit, and knew his prisoner number. But he was an imposter. Somewhere in the mud and chaos between the river and the recapture, the real Schaeffer had executed a final, brilliant maneuver, a swap of identity. Who was this man? A comrade sacrificing his own freedom, a desperate soul paid to act as a decoy. The war machine, focused on the larger conflict, dismissed it as a clerical error. But for Karl Moeller, it was confirmation. A few days later, he discovered a hidden note, a message from beyond the wire. "Karl, tell them I made it. Don't look for me. Don't tell them how." Hutch. In the years that followed, the story of Heinrich Schaeffer transformed from a military incident into a powerful myth. Rumors and unconfirmed sightings trickled in for decades. A German mechanic working on a ranch in northern Mexico, an elderly man applying for residency in Mexico City, a quiet figure in a Stetson hat seen at a local rodeo. For the American veterans who had guarded him, Schaeffer became a figure of grudging admiration, a symbol of an indomitable will that their perfect system could not entirely contain. For the former German prisoners, he was a beacon of hope, the one man who beat the impeccable American math. The camps were eventually dismantled, the land reclaimed by the prairie, but the legend persisted. The deeper meaning of Schaeffer's story lies not in the details of his escape, which remain shrouded in mystery, but in what it revealed about both the captor and the captive. The United States demonstrated that its greatest strength was not merely its industrial might or military precision, but its profound confidence, which allowed it to treat its enemies with a humanity that ultimately disarmed their ideology. Heinrich Schaeffer, in turn, demonstrated that the human spirit's yearning for autonomy could not be fully quantified or contained, even by the most benevolent of prisons. His legacy is a complex tapestry of courage, compassion, and the eternal quest for a freedom that is not granted by any authority, but must be seized and defined by the individual. He escaped not just from a camp, but from the very concept of captivity, becoming a permanent ghost in the annals of history, a man who walked into the Texas dust, and in doing so, walked into legend. The legend of Heinrich Schaeffer did not fade with the passing decades. Instead, it deepened, weaving itself into the very soil of Texas and the collective memory of a reconciled world. In the small towns that dotted the plains around the former Camp Hearn, the story was passed down through generations, not as a tale of an enemy's defiance, but as a strange local folklore. Old-timers at the general store would speak of the German ghost, a figure who represented something ineffable about the human condition. They'd tell of a rancher's daughter in the 1950s who swore she saw a tall, lean man with sharp blue eyes and a sun-weathered face watching from a distance as they mended a fence. When her father offered a wave, the man simply touched the brim of his hat and melted back into the mesquite. They spoke of a drifter in the 1970s, a man of few words with a faint Germanic accent, who did odd jobs for a week at a farm near the Mexican border, fixing a tractor engine with an intuitive genius before moving on at dawn, leaving a neatly made cot and a single silver coin on the kitchen porch as thanks. For Karl Müller, back in a rebuilt but forever changed Germany, Schaeffer's absence was a permanent presence. He became an engineer, raised a family, and built a life. Yet the question of his friend's fate was a quiet companion. He followed every historical article, every television documentary about the POW camps. He corresponded with American historians, sharing his fragments of memory, always hoping to find the final piece of the puzzle. In 1995, a frail, elderly Karl received a letter from a researcher who had been digging through declassified archives. There was no definitive proof, but there was a compelling pattern. The researcher had found a record from a small Catholic church in a remote village in Coahuila, Mexico, dated 1958. It was a baptismal certificate for an Heinrich Schaeffer, listed as a widower and a mechanic. The godfather was listed as Earl W., a retired American rancher. The researcher noted it was likely a coincidence, but Karl knew. Earl was the foreman, the cowboy who had tracked Heinrich. This was not a coincidence. It was a signature. It was the final, quiet confirmation that his friend had not only found freedom, but had built a life within it, forging a bond with his former pursuer that transcended the old hatreds. Karl closed his eyes, the weight of 50 years lifting from his shoulders. Heinrich had not just escaped, he had been redeemed. The broader historical perspective on the American POW system only grew more respectful with time. Military strategists and ethicists came to see it as a masterstroke of psychological warfare. By adhering strictly to the Geneva Convention, by offering education, medical care, and fair wages for labor, the United States had systematically dismantled the Nazi propaganda that depicted them as barbarians. The returning German prisoners became accidental ambassadors for American values, speaking of a nation so powerful it could afford to be merciful. The story of Heinrich Schaeffer became the ultimate expression of this dynamic. His escape was a testament to the individual spirit they could not break, but his legend was a testament to the system that, in its own way, had earned his respect enough for him to want to escape into its landscape, not just from its captivity. In the early 2000s, the site of Camp Hearn was officially designated a historical landmark. At the dedication ceremony, a strange and poignant meeting occurred. The grandson of Karl Müller, holding his grandfather's wartime diary, stood beside the elderly daughter of Earl Whitaker. They exchanged stories, the German side of the legend and the Texan side. They realized their narratives, once on opposite sides of a wire fence and a world war, had merged into a single, shared story of a man's quest for peace. The ultimate truth of Heinrich Schaeffer's fate may never be documented in an official file. Perhaps he eventually died as Enrique, an old man sitting on a porch in Mexico, watching the sun set over the Sierra Madre. Perhaps his bones lie in an unmarked grave somewhere in the vastness of the Southwest. But in a way, his physical end is irrelevant. Heinrich Schaeffer achieved a different kind of immortality. He became a permanent question mark against the backdrop of absolute certainty, a symbol that in the midst of history's most destructive war, acts of individual defiance and unexpected kindness could create a legend more enduring than any battle. The story ends as it began, with silence and space. The Texas wind still whispers through the grass where the barracks once stood. A rusted spoon or a button might still surface after a hard rain, a metallic ghost from a forgotten time. And in that whisper, in that glint of metal, the legend of the man who walked away remains, forever walking into the horizon, forever free. He is no longer a German pilot or an escaped prisoner of war. He is a timeless idea that the human spirit cannot be fully catalogued, contained, or comprehended, and that its quest for freedom is the one story that never truly ends.